Hello, welcome to another episode of the DRH Show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and wellness. Today, I'm joined by the founder of Behold Retreats, a wellness service based in Thailand, Jonathan DePotta. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Dennis. It's lovely to be here. I'm pleased to join you and very excited to have this conversation together.
Okay. It's great to have you here, Jonathan. Let's start off with you telling us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Hawaii, and after high school, moved to New Zealand, lived there for about 10 years, and then subsequently joined the corporate world after my university studies, and then I've been living the past 8 years in Asia. And about 5 years ago now, I had been working in Hong Kong and kind of felt like something was missing in life, and so decided to take a year off. And during that year, found my way to Peru, and was lucky enough to participate in a plant medicine ayahuasca retreat during that period. And what I experienced there in Peru was so fundamentally at odds with the narrative around these sorts of medicines that I knew from growing up in the US. And so that was really the beginning of a journey for me in discovering and exploring and understanding psychedelics, plant medicine, like psilocybin, ayahuasca, etc. And I'm so pleased that I did, because it's just completely transformed my life for the better. And I think that there's still a lot of baggage around these subjects, and so part of what we're doing with Behold Retreats is to raise education and awareness, and to guide people towards really exceptional, tailor-made experiences for people to get really the most out of their work from plant medicine.
So, Jonathan, you've been an advocate of plant medicine in trying to promote people's mental health and well-being, but do you also have your own personal experience with, I think they call it entheogens, and do you have some personal benefit that you've experienced from it?
Yeah, it's I went into my first experience with a high degree of skepticism and apprehension, if I'm to be perfectly honest. And I was poorly educated, I was poorly prepared, and I really wasn't very well supported at the end of the experience. And so I wasn't really able to capitalize upon the benefits that are available, because I wasn't kind of supported through that integration process. But yes, absolutely. I've had a handful plus of my own plant medicine experiences over the past number of years. My first, as I mentioned, was with ayahuasca there in Peru. And, for me, that first experience was transformational in terms of the insights and the experiences itself, showing me how my own limiting kind of mental patterns, my own limiting behaviors were keeping me from fulfilling my own potential. And so it was a very humbling experience, very profound experience. And after the 1 week retreat, what happened was that, I kind of reverted back to the pre-retreat me over the space of about the month that followed. And the neurology in this space is super interesting, because as we've all grown over decades, what's happened is that we've come to where we've come to use a small subset of our neural pathways over and over and over again, and it's come at the cost of our neuroplasticity. So what these plant medicines have the potential to do is to help us. They promote neurogenesis, which allows the creation of new neurons, the creation of new neuronal connections, which then allows us to kind of build back up our neuroplasticity and to begin to overcome some of those limiting mental patterns, limiting behaviors, to really use the full capacity of our brain for our own benefit, really.
So thank you for talking us through about psychedelic properties of some medicines, such as you've mentioned ayahuasca. It's not really something that is really popular. What do you think that plant-based medicine are back on the agenda now? Could you tell us some of the scientific research coming from leading institutions?
Yeah, sure. And the amount of research is just growing exponentially at the moment. I think it was just a couple weeks ago that Berkeley announced that they are opening a dedicated psychedelic research center. There's ongoing research at prominent institutions such as Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Yale, NYU, Imperial College in London, and there's just more and more of this work happening globally because the results that are coming from the research are so compelling. In people with mental health disorders and addictive disorders, as well as for people who are otherwise quote unquote healthy. And I think that just, part of that just goes to show, I think at the moment, the paradigm that we're stuck in is that, we've set this kind of subjective bar that if you're below this bar, then you have a mental health problem. And if you're above this bar, then everything is fine. But I think that's actually the wrong way for us to look at mental health and for us to look at consciousness, because there's room for improvement for each and every one of us. And equally, I think that each and every one of us should be focused upon that. So I think what we're seeing from these leading institutions reflects that, because they're broadening out their research base from initial focus on anxiety, depression, addictions to smoking, any other range of addictive disorders. There's so many these days around pornography, gambling, alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. The list just goes on, as well as, obsessive compulsive disorders, PTSD, et cetera. And we're seeing, positive results from this research that are, orders of magnitude better than what we're seeing from the current set of pharmacological and therapeutic solutions that we have today. So it's a real renaissance period. I think we now have about 2 decades of really high quality research, which is a great foundation to build upon. And so that's part of why we've been motivated to establish Behold Retreats, because unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of people, live in countries where this work is still illegal, despite the fact that we've got 2 decades of incredible science. So it's unfortunately another one of those areas where we have this incredible gap between the science on the one hand, which is absolutely rock solid, and the policy, which still has quite a bit of work to do to catch up. Just 2 days ago, it might be just 1 day ago, Oregon has just legalized psilocybin magic mushrooms statewide. So that's a huge breakthrough for the U.S. And the first of its kind in America. So super, super exciting. And I think, as the narrative starts to change in the U.S., which, it was the U.S. that played a fundamental role in making these plant medicines illegal worldwide, and actually, decreed that many other countries sign a declaration to make them illegal through the 1960s, and the decree itself was in 1971. And now it's kind of ironic that the U.S. is also playing the leading role in helping us kind of unwind that agreement that so many countries had signed up to at the behest of the U.S.
Now, Jonathan, earlier you mentioned some mental disorders that plant-based medicine could potentially help. But I was just wondering if there's a typical patient for whom this kind of experience would be most beneficial.
Yeah, it's it's always funny to answer this question because the reality is that if you look at the research and the breadth of applications, that will lead you to the answer, which I think is a correct one, which is that this can benefit pretty much everyone. Now, in saying that, there's a couple exceptions and caveats that I like to add to that, because I don't want to come across as overly pro-plant medicine, despite the fact that that is the field that I work in. So I think first and foremost, it's important that people feel called to do this work, because it is a very personal decision to work with plant medicine. These are very powerful experiences. And anyone who is considering doing this work, I would very much encourage them to do a great deal of their own research before participating in any sort of experience themselves. in saying that, this is a difficult field to navigate, both in terms of research as well as finding yourself to a high quality experience. And so again, that's part of the motivation for establishing Behold retreats. The second thing that I'd say is that there are a number of contraindications. So sets of people for which these experiences are not safe. There are both physical as well as psychological contraindications. So for the physical, any heart disorders or stroke immediately rules out. If there are other physical limitations, then those need to be taken into consideration as well. So we have a 6-page, quite exhaustive medical screening that we perform for each of our clients to make sure that they're physically and psychologically safe. From a psychological perspective, anyone who is suffering from any form of psychosis or who has family members who suffer from psychosis are screened out. Anyone suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and there's a couple others that get more careful attention. In saying that, those people who are suffering from PTSD or severe anxiety or depression obviously do require a very specialist care and support. And so, we take that very, very seriously and make sure that those people are supported in their daily life and then also professionally supported in the right ways so that, they can really be guided throughout their healing journey. But coming back to your question around who can benefit, there's typically kind of 5 overarching motivations. Number 1 is to do with healing, and we've spoken a little bit about that already. Number 2 is growth or creativity. So those people who are looking to, expand their minds. Number 3 is establishing a spiritual connection or deepening a spiritual connection. And we see a lot of activity around palliative care. So as people reach end of life, this is a very powerful experience for those individuals because there's often a fear and anxiety of dying. And one of these experiences or a few of these experiences can really do a tremendous amount to alleviate that. And then finally, there's those people who are looking for a recreational experience or for those who unfortunately are using these for kind of more abusive purposes. So we screen out those last 2 categories. We're not really working with people who are looking for something that's fun, which this is serious, deeply introspective personal work. And we're not looking for those people who are just looking for an escape from daily life. That's really not what we're about.
Now, Jonathan, you mentioned earlier 2 plant-based medicines, psilocybin and ayahuasca. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm not really familiar about the components of these plant-based medicines. So can you tell us the difference between these 2 and how do you implement them within your wellness center?
Yeah, sure. So the way in which they are used can actually vary depending upon the retreat itself. Psilocybin tends to be more of a, if we were to compare the 2, psilocybin is a softer experience. It's more commonly known as kind of quote unquote magic mushrooms. So, these are plants, psilocybe mushrooms grow pretty much across the globe, and they can be found in I'd say more places in the world than not, without having a full map of that. Ayahuasca, on the other hand, has a tradition in Central and South America. There is a broad variety of traditions from that region, and it's typically a mixture of at least 2 plants. Some traditions tend to also mix in other plants. Now, for psilocybin, there is one kind of, psilocybin is the kind of active ingredient within the psilocybin mushrooms, but obviously if it's natural, then there are other compounds present, whereas ayahuasca is a much more complex medicine. There's one of our advisors was sharing with me that there's 463 compounds that are present in ayahuasca. So it's a very, very complex medicine. And so as a result of that, it's actually far less studied because you'll appreciate that in the West, we actually have a strong preference for isolation of a single compound to allow us to control for variables and to control for dosage as well. So, ayahuasca is a very powerful, profound experience, but it also has, it also has a very strong detoxification component to that. And so people are often purging physically during the ayahuasca experience, whereas that's far less common with psilocybin. So generally speaking, if people have had no prior experience with plant medicine, we often recommend to them that they might consider a psilocybin experience first, and then explore perhaps an ayahuasca experience further down the road if they feel so called. And then some clients, on the other hand, do feel very called towards ayahuasca because it is often described as a deeper and more profound and more of a full body healing experience. And the active molecule there with ayahuasca is DMT, which is also known as the spirit molecule. So it's certainly fair to say that there's a deeper spiritual connection that's available with ayahuasca as well.
Now, Jonathan, you just mentioned how complex plant-based medicine are. So some people may be ambivalent or anxious about it because they think it may amplify pain, sadness, or past trauma. So how do you put reassurance to those people who are anxious? Do you offer some form of psychological or even psychiatric support during those treatments?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. If anyone was approaching their first plant medicine experience and didn't have a little bit of apprehension, I would be incredibly surprised. They're a very brave individual. So I think a degree of apprehension and it's the other word I'm searching for. I think a degree of almost sacredness around these types of experiences is the right sort of context and the right sort of thinking to have around such an experience. I think part of what we are doing with Behold Retreats, which is quite different from what's otherwise out there, is to really take the time to understand our clients and to really understand their needs, their goals, and their preferences. And then through that experience, we're able to really match them with the right sort of guidance based upon what they're looking to achieve, and also to bring them to a retreat experience which kind of fits their cosmology and their goals and their needs. So if someone is coming to us and they're the CEO of a 50-person company and they're just trying to turbocharge their own personal growth, that's a very different sort of a journey to someone who's been suffering from some anxiety for the last couple of years, and so we match them with a guide or with a therapist depending upon their needs, and then begin to work through what is the sort of experience that is attractive to you. Is it something that's more shamanic, say in Peru or Costa Rica, or is it something that's more in a more modern setting in, say, Jamaica or Portugal? And so we have a broad variety of retreat options available that we talk through with our clients once we really understand them and understand what they're looking to achieve, and thus we're able to guide them into those experiences and to provide the support around them to really help them prepare for the experience and also to integrate the experience. So in terms of preparation, we really kind of take the time to spend with our clients to explain to them in more detail what these experiences are like, the sorts of challenges that can commonly arise, how to navigate those challenges, and that they are normal. So many of us have compartmentalized traumatic experiences away from our waking consciousness, or we have very deeply ingrained subconscious patterns that do not serve us. And as we explore the depths of our subconscious in this altered state of consciousness, these realizations do come up, and they are painful to experience out at times, emotionally and sometimes even physically painful. So it's very important that the right support and the right guidance is around the individuals during these times, and that they feel really held and supported through that period, not just during the retreat, but also when they return home. Because what I commonly say to our clients is, the real opportunity is actually between the end of the retreat and about a month later. Like, that's the period of time where you can really implement those changes and keep those commitments that you made to yourself during the retreat, such that you're no longer overly reactive. You're no longer losing your patience. You're no longer getting angry and frustrated in the ways that you were before, because there's certain ways to integrate these lessons to increase your overall well-being and increase the harmony that you have in your life ultimately. And that's part of what this work is all about.
Now, Jonathan, if you could just expand on that, what you said about patients coming back after the treatment. So are these essentially short-lived or long-term experience after the treatment process?
Yeah, so so the benefits themselves are long-lasting if we take the time and the energy and make the commitment to integrate the lessons properly. And again, I was really motivated to establish Behold Retreats because of this dynamic. After a month after my first retreat, I was exactly back to the same person that I was before. So I missed out on all these massive benefits. I was shown all these beautiful things on, ways that I might improve my life, but I missed them because I didn't have the right integration support. I didn't have the right guidance. I didn't even know that I needed it. To be perfectly honest, I didn't know that was such a thing that was available. And so, what we typically have is weekly or sometimes twice weekly sessions with each of our clients post-retreat to really understand, as they return back to their families, their work, traffic, the triggers of everyday life, how are they going in terms of holding themselves accountable to the person that they know they can be, because as all of those things come creeping back in, it's so easy to revert back to who we were. And so, daily practices, and then 1 weekly or twice weekly sessions with integration guidance in order to really, embed those improvements and sustain those improvements to the quality of everyday life. That's really the focus of this work, so that people don't have to go back 2 months later and say, okay, I needed that same lesson again because I haven't learned the first time. So this is really about maximizing the benefits of plant medicine, as opposed to, sometimes people say, oh I've done 100 plant medicine ceremonies already, and it's kind of like, wow, okay, and you're still, it seems you're still not doing so great. So there's a lot more to this work than just the application of plant medicine and then whiz bang and all your problems are solved. That's not it. There's very deep introspective personal work to be done to understand yourself better and to see what you're doing and how you're thinking and how you're acting that's limiting you from your own potential. And so that's really the journey and what we're really excited about in terms of what we're doing differently from, there's about 200 retreat centers out there, but the overwhelming majority of them are focused upon the retreat aspect as opposed to helping you maximize the benefits of it post-retreat.
And of course, Jonathan, this journey is a two-way process. So at one point you mentioned how this could, how a patient would benefit from this, but essentially there's also something coming in from the therapist. So how do you identify trustworthy therapists and healers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, therapy is relatively well understood. The work that the healers are doing is actually very poorly understood and very poorly documented, actually. And it is quite important. So I'll come back to that. In terms of the therapists that we work with, so there's a couple of things that we look for. One is we've got a great range of therapists that are experts in working with different types of people. And, that's important because everyone is on their own walk of life and everyone has their own different cultural associations, right? So we do our best to match the individuals with not only a therapist that is an expert in the goals that they're looking to work on, or a coach or a guide that they're looking for the things that they're looking to work on, but also someone who's a match culturally. And I think that's super important. We have clients coming from around the globe, and you can appreciate that the American culture is very different from the British culture, is very different from French culture, which is very different from Hong Kong or Singaporean culture. And so what we, as much as possible, we try to match the individuals to expertise. The other aspect that's important is, how many how many people have been guided by the coaches, by the therapists in the past. So we do a lot of reference checks and whatnot, and really take the time and the energy to get to know each of our therapists and each of our coaches and guides, so that we really can believe in what they're saying. And for in this space, it's really interesting, because you can come to understand the level of consciousness in the individual themselves by the profundity of the experiences that they've had with plant medicine. And so there's always a direct relationship between the quality of the work that the coach or the therapist has done for themselves and the quality of work that they are able to do for others. So that's another aspect that we also bring into it.
Now, Jonathan, you've mentioned earlier about Oregon decriminalizing the use of heroin and cocaine. And from what I've heard from the news, there are also 4 states who legalize the use of cannabis. Now, how do you see psychiatrists integrating plant medicine therapy within, let's say, the next few decades?
Yeah. Because you've mentioned a few other drugs there that I keep very, very well away from. Personally, I'm not a big believer in cannabis. I think it has its place in the world in treating symptoms, particularly those that are suffering from pain and perhaps anxiety. But I haven't seen very much from a medical perspective that leads me to believe that cannabis is a cure. Which I think is absolutely the case for the likes of ayahuasca and psilocybin. So, with cannabis, what you see is that people start smoking it or taking it in some way, shape, or form, and they continue to do so indefinitely. Whereas that is very much not the case with ayahuasca, or psilocybin. These are non-addictive substances that are labeled as such by the medical world. And then there's other drugs that you mentioned, cocaine and heroin. And I think, honestly speaking, I think it's probably the right thing societally to make these drugs decriminalized, so that we're not, filling our prisons with people who have addictive disorders. But those are very destructive. Those are very destructive drugs, and so we of course stay completely away from it. But then to come to your question, given the results that are coming from the science, 2 decades of incredible results from these leading institutions. If we fast forward a decade, I believe that the narrative around these plant medicines will have changed 180 degrees. I think it's already changing, and it's changing fast. And what we've seen in Oregon is an example of that. But absolutely everyone can improve their mental health. Absolutely everyone can raise their level of consciousness. And these plants are profound in their ability to accelerate that. There's a theory out there which is described as the stoned ape theory, which is that our brains actually may have co-evolved with these plants, and that it's these plants that actually promote neurogenesis, the growth in our prefrontal cortex, which actually explains why our prefrontal cortex has actually grown so rapidly over the past 200,000 years. And we don't actually have another logical reason for the expansion of our prefrontal cortex over the past 200,000 years, to the best of my knowledge. So I'm led to believe that there is forthcoming research from one of these leading institutions that is going to provide evidence for a physiological response in our brain to these plant medicines, which would lend credibility to this stoned ape theory, which would change the narrative incredibly substantially in terms of what these plant medicines are, what they represent, and how we might have co-evolved together to make us as a species the way that we are today.
And do you know of any psychiatrists who recommend psychedelics to their patient as part of their treatment?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not a scientist either, or a researcher in any case. What I would say is that in the conversations that I've had in this subject, there is clearly a requirement for psychiatrists to be incredibly careful because they are obviously doctors. And this is not generally speaking, this is not a legitimized form of treatment today. I've seen some back and forth with, say, for example, the California Board of Ethics that basically said that it would not be possible for psychiatrists to refer clients to these forms of treatments. However, one of our advisors does tell me that he says, look, if I was in your shoes, I might explore this other thing. And that's a way for him to not recommend this form of treatment while still speaking about this form of treatment. So that's one way that some psychiatrists are getting around this. There are also psychiatrists that are supporting this work very directly, obviously. And some of them with active practices. So there's another gentleman that we've been speaking to who he has his own private practice with ketamine, but he also supports clients that go on ayahuasca retreats. And so the framing for that conversation is that it's about harm reduction. So the client, the individual, has decided, upon their own volition, to participate in an ayahuasca retreat, and he is providing the guidance around, before and after that experience, such that they can get the most out of the experience and also make sure that harm reduction, that they are as safe as possible and able to care for themselves to the extent that the individual has been prepared appropriately for the experience. So that's a few of the dynamics at play. I think, honestly speaking, the dynamics are probably, in terms of legality and what psychiatrists can and can't do, are probably different country by country. And so, I can't speak on a country by country basis.
Now, but do you run any specific retreats so that psychiatrists could experience this firsthand?
Yeah, we do. We've got our first one in February next year, which will be specifically for mental health practitioners. This is given this is just completely a new paradigm and such a promising paradigm for the mental health world. There's a real requirement for the mental health practitioners and community to get up to speed. And the best, you can only read about plant medicine and for so long before you kind of have to dip your toe in and see what it's all about. So again, recognizing it's not for everyone, right? And we're never here to push our services, but yes, we have our first retreat in February. I believe it's third week of February next year for mental health care practitioners.
Brilliant. And do you see a time when this form of therapy, as you've said, this is not yet widely accessible, but do you see it becoming more sort of mainstream within the healthcare sector?
Yeah, how that emerges, I think, will be quite interesting. One of the descriptions that one of our advisors gave me, which gave me a good chuckle, was that in the West we have, as I mentioned before, we've got this obsession with single, isolation of a single compound, and trying to find that silver bullet compound, whereas plant medicine, particularly ayahuasca, is just considerably more complex than that. And so what she said was that we're taking this new form of treatment, which is clearly highly effective, and then we're trying to fit it into what might be described as a broken medical system. And she says there's a lot of compromises that are being made along the way. So I think absolutely, these medicines will play a larger and larger role in the psychiatric and just the broader mental health care, as well as the broader wellness and physical health industries over time. The question is how that will emerge, and I think that will vary on a country by country basis, and depends, to a great extent upon the history, the culture, the associations with this work, and the laws themselves.
Now, Jonathan, we're already nearing towards the end of this interview, but you've already explained to us what psychedelics are and what the whole retreats is. So let's explore more about you. Is there a particular individual was the greatest influence on your work?
A particular individual that influenced our work?
Is there a particular individual or a piece of literature, a piece of book was the greatest influence on your work as a person?
Yeah. Yeah. Personally, I've been quite inspired by Rick Doblin in the U.S., who's the leader of MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. He's been pursuing this very actively for, I think, like 4 decades now, and he's been on the right side of the law, and on the right side of how can we use this to help people for such a sustained period of time. And MDMA is now, through the trials that MAPS is leading, MDMA is now going to be, it's in stage 3 trials and looking very likely to be approved nationwide in the US in the next year or two here. So I think, for me personally, to see someone that's made such a sustained effort in this space, despite the fact that a lot of the culture was working against them, for me personally was quite inspiring. There's a book that I'm looking at here just on my shelf that I've enjoyed, which is Consciousness Medicine, which is a great book. There's another book which I really enjoy, which is it has nothing to do with plant medicine, but it's about elevating consciousness. And this work, this work is not really about quote unquote plant medicine. It's about improving mental health, which is available for all of us, and elevating consciousness as is also available for all of us. And so the book is Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. And what he has done is to outline a map of consciousness and to associate basically the energetic frequencies of emotions as they appear in the body, and to relate that to the levels of consciousness. So it's very interesting and compelling work, and incredibly powerful work, even for those who may not be inclined to do plant medicine. There's a lot to be gained from this book, Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, and those two in combination, really strong guidance. A really well-run plant medicine retreat with, really expert healers, and the process of letting go are things that, when they're brought together in the right way, can really accelerate someone through their own personal growth and spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm. And Jonathan, what's the most important thing you want the public to know about your work?
There's a quote out there there's a few quotes out there that I've heard that have stuck with me. The reality is that there's about 200 plus retreat centers worldwide. At the moment, this work is entirely unregulated. So just because there's a nice website and some 5-star reviews doesn't necessarily mean that this work is being done at a high level. The quotes that have come to me that have stuck with me is, number one, where the hopeful gather, so too do the predators. And that's so true in this space, because there is just so many cowboys that are out there that are riding this wave. As the prominence of plant medicine continues to rise up and up and up, more and more people are turning to this modality for help. And so there's a lot of people out there who are making the most of that without perhaps the most heartfelt intentions in mind. So that's the first quote. The second quote that stuck with me is, choose your healer like you would choose your neurosurgeon. And again, that indicates the profundity and the deepness of these experiences. You are quite literally rewiring your brain for your benefits. And so being in the right guidance for those deep experiences is of utmost importance. Most people tend to start with a group experience because it's a more cost-effective way to get started on this type of work. I myself make no hesitation in recommending anyone who's in a position to do so, to do this work privately. I've had all of my major breakthroughs working privately with therapists who do this work at the very highest level, and they charge accordingly for their services. So, this is really deep soul work, introspective. You're really getting into the depths of your psyche and seeing what's there. And more often than not, people encounter things there that they really don't like. And so it's super important to be surrounded by all of the support and guidance to really facilitate your healing and your growth through that, to make sure that you land very firmly as the new beautiful you, as best as possible. So anyone out there who's listening to this, take this seriously. Take yourself seriously. This work is no joke.
And Jonathan, how do you relax? What's your de-stressing outlet?
Yeah, I do. It's there's a few different things. This work tends to guide people towards a meditation practice, and I'm no exception. So I typically meditate an hour or two each day. Yoga is another big one for me. I love jumping in the ocean. I'm based here in Koh Phangan in Thailand at the moment, because not many people are traveling, so I get in the ocean whenever I can. And my cat is also just here behind the monitor. When he's not biting me, it's nice to spend relaxing time with him as well.
And what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work within the wellness sector?
Yeah, well, I've spent most of my career in management consulting in the corporate world, advising Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies on their digital strategies and their digital transformation programs. So, as we grow Behold Retreats, I also want to use that as a platform to begin to advise governments on this subject. It's important that governments, whether it's health officials or justice officials, that governments globally understand what this topic represents and how it can benefit their individual countries. And my cat's coming through here, buddy. So it's so part of my motivation as we launch Behold Retreats here is that that I'm able to free up some more of my time and to get back to some of the work that I was doing before in terms of working with officials and governments and telling them a little bit more about plant medicine.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Jonathan, what else is in the pipeline?
Boy, Behold Retreats is still new. We've been super excited to support the clients that we've had before. It's just been beautiful to see their own transformations and to see just how they've changed for the better so quickly. So that's very exciting. We're doubling down in terms of what we're doing and the ways that we're doing it. So we're really excited about helping people do this work in the best way. So that's very exciting. We're also in conversation with a few of the governments here in the region in Asia, and we're getting close to identifying a country that may be the first to support this work. So that's very exciting. We're stepping through the process with at least one government and perhaps another here shortly, in order to be able to do this work. So that's super motivating, super exciting. This is really all about, our experiences are expensive, right? They're not accessible to the overwhelming majority of the population, unfortunately. So I think what's in the pipeline, if we look out 10, 15 years, hopefully sooner, is that these medicines and these therapies and these retreats and these experiences become available to a much broader set of the population, because this is important work that has had such a profound impact and improvement upon my life. And so I know that similar benefits are also available there for others. So everyone has the absolute right to be at their absolute best. I truly believe that. And so it's very exciting to think about, legalization and democratization and how we can really accelerate that conversation. So yeah, we're very motivated to continue to build out our network, and to build out our business to really be able to be of service to more people. That's really what this work is all about. It's not, it's not about making a bunch of money. It's about making the world a more beautiful place.
Exciting landscape, Jonathan. Jonathan Lipata, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dennis. Really appreciate having me and in the conversation we've had.
Thank you.